Trigger warnings, mentions of molestation, sexual harassment by a family member, and drug overdose. Of course, it's Dexter he wakes up as next. There must be some lesson behind all these transitions, surely. When Peter first woke up as Susie, then Luke, followed by Dylan, and then Nina, he couldn't have possibly imagined Dexter to be the next. He should have, though. Because if after that drunken kiss Peter has yearned for anyone, it's probably Dexter himself. That plus the various encounters that he's had with Dexter in the span of a month or so. And from the consciousness of another person, that little desperate feeling has only been provoked more. So, when Peter wakes up as Dexter next, the first thing he does is look for the diary he knows Dexter maintains. It was something that Dexter had informed him of ages ago. "I've never missed a day since my 7th birthday," he had said. "All of my diaries go wherever I go," he had continued during that conversation. "If I am shifting someplace new, I keep them with me all the time." Then he'd look at Peter and ask if he does the same. Peter confessed that it was a fancy idea that he was once obsessed with, but then just as quickly got bored with. "It takes an effort to keep a diary," he replied. Dexter had chuckled at that. "It sure does." And now here is Peter prompting Dexter consciously to go through the diary for his own sake. Now this is something that he shouldn't do. Not only is this a massive breach of privacy, but it also makes him a bad person in 100 different ways. I sit here and watch Peter consciously struggle within Dexter. If I may be so bold, I can say this with conviction that this is Peter's one of many tests. If he pushes enough, Dexter will surely go through every single page that mentions Peter. If Peter doesn't push him, Dexter will probably only return to it during the late afternoon or evening to add something in it, and probably will not go through the previous entries. Thankfully, Peter's moral compass is strong enough that he pulls back and avoids a catastrophe. Now that Peter's got nothing to do, his consciousness settles back, now largely dormant, and observes Dexter going through his morning routine. When an hour later Dexter settles down at his dining table, he receives a message from Sammy. "I really do not want to get involved with something like this, dear Dexter, but they've caught Peter's uncle under the suspicions that he might have something to do with those unadministered drugs." Dexter's curiosity doubly increases at that, thanks to Peter. Peter's consciousness now peaked engages with current activities more, and he watches in fascination as Dexter fingers quickly rush over the keyboard in a quick reply to Sammy. "I will be there. How did they catch him?" he sends her a reply. Sammy's reply comes shortly. If Peter could snort at this time, he really would have. The way the two are engaging in this conversation feels familial, as if Dexter has become such a close friend of Sammy during this particular tragedy that he might as well be a part of the family. Otherwise, why would his grandma share something so personal like this? Besides that, Peter is just as curious to understand how Englund was caught, or if there's any evidence against that monster yet. "CCTV," comes Sammy's reply some 10 minutes later. "I do not know how to process this news, Dexter. After that poor girl, I'm fearing what else Englund has done. Nina's case was public, but they will not publish this one until they have something." Dexter's mouth, much to Peter's surprise, curls in anger. On the other hand, Peter thinks he would give up everything in the world to see the published articles regarding Nina's case, and if the final verdict angered people or not, but that's for later. Peter realizes as Dexter gets up and grabs his keys. Dexter is in a hurry, and he is sure as hell going to meet Sammy now. "Where can I find you?" he texts Sammy next. Sammy's text comes quickly. "At the police station." Half an hour later. Dexter is huffing by the time he reaches the station. At the sight of him, Sammy wordlessly passes a bottle of water to him and pats his shoulder as he gulps it all down in one go. "Thanks," he tells her. "Oh God, I hate winters." "How do you get so sweaty in winter, son?" Sammy says, and it sounds more like a statement rather than an actual question. "I have yet to see him, Englund, I mean. I don't know how to look at him and not lose my mind." "You've avoided him enough, Sammy," Dexter replies. Sammy sighs at that. "He's my son. Neither Englund nor Arnold would have ever done anything to actually make me proud. Both are filled with an ego so big that it might as well swallow everything and everyone in this town." This time, Dexter pats her shoulder in sympathy. "Let's get it done with." Sammy sighs, and for someone of her age, she looks as anxious as a teenager. It makes Dexter realize that she may not be well prepared to encounter her son again, having dealt with him after the recent case that Englund has finished with. "Let's go then. So far the police are only looking for a valid explanation. If they're not able to find anything, they'll have to let him go. I don't want that. I want Englund to explain what he was doing around that time in the hospital and why Peter got sick only after he left. You'll have to convince him. Sammy looks at Dexter with curiosity. Convince him of what? That you're on his side, Sammy. There is only a group of people who aren't aware of Englund's case, and they're dead and 6 feet under the ground. Everyone and their parents know what Englund has done and how easily he got out of charges, given the immense support of his fans around the town who like him for his philanthropic habits. And to have him do something dangerous again, it definitely speaks for the quality of his person. So when Dexter sees him again, he keeps himself away from him and sits at the other side of the station, though he keeps his eyes on him. Several emotions brew within him, mainly anger and resentment, but when slowly fear starts sweeping in his veins, confusion follows it. Why would he be afraid of seeing Englund? Dexter doesn't understand. But we are aware of why that is happening, or why Dexter suddenly feels sweaty. As he grapples with these new and sudden emotions, Sammy deals with her son for the first time in a long time. What have you done, Englund? She asks as soon as she spots him. Mom, Englund replies, let's not do this. You tried to kill my grandson, she exclaims. Have you got any proof of that? Englund asks and then bitterly adds that since she didn't support him in his case with Nina, she shouldn't be present here either. I was there to check on Peter. He's my dear nephew after all. I had to go and see him and make sure he's well. Peter got sick soon after. Englund gives her a blank stare in reply. You did harm that girl, didn't you, Englund? Sammy replies, forgetting all that Dexter had advised just earlier. Why do you suppose I would have given you my support? Englund shrugs. Because you're my mother, woman. What else? Sammy sighs. Help me out here, Englund. What did you do? I promise I will help you get out of here. I will get out of here anyway, Mom. No worries. Sammy's face settles in anger. Did you hurt Peter the same way you hurt that girl? Is that why you were there? Did you drug Peter to hide that? She's definitely getting somewhere. When Englund's expression changes for the slightest second into that of panic, she realizes she is right. She staggers back as Englund's expression smooths out again. I hope you remember you have no importance, Mom. If a threat has ever been shared between the mother-son duo, this is it. Sammy places a hand over her chest and stares at him in disbelief. It makes sense, she says then. It makes sense because Peter hated hearing your name. Why did I? How could I miss this? Behind her, the cop observes the exchange between the two and seems interested in taking note of whatever is going on between them. Surely, I guess Englund's behavior has enraged more than one person in this town. I wonder how many of them want him gone. Is there any problem here, ma'am? The cop asks. Sammy stares at her son with teary eyes and then turns around. Do not let him out, officer, she tells the cop. He's a monster. He's a monster! That piques the cop's attention and he gives her a glass of water. The commotion catches Dexter's attention and he rushes to her aid. Are you okay, Sammy? Dexter asks the same moment as the cop asks. Did he say something? Did he confess, ma'am? Dexter glares at him, but that doesn't deter the cop. What did he say? Sammy shakes her head at him. He hasn't said anything, she replies, but it all makes sense. She turns to Dexter. There was a time when he avoided Englund like a plague. Peter, he never did that before. I shamefully accepted that to be part of his recent gloomy personality. I know that was a mistake, but it makes sense to me now, Dexter. He has hurt Peter. Dexter's eyebrows furrow. What did he do, Sammy? He has hurt Peter the same way he hurt that poor girl Nina. And really, that's all that anyone needs to hear. An hour later. A few things happen in that 1 hour. Peter's consciousness with interest notices the rapidly rising rage in Dexter's body the moment he realizes what Sammy means. He doesn't do anything brash like punch Englund through his head or something resulting in a bloodbath in the heart of the law. No, he doesn't do any such thing. But he does something. He speedily walks towards the curious and somewhat fearful-looking Englund and punches him so hard that it breaks his nose. As Englund howls in pain and cradles his now bleeding nose, Dexter is pulled by a pair of cops who immediately warn him that they will put him behind bars for the violence. "But he hurt Peter," Dexter exclaims as the cop indeed pushes him inside the bars. "We have no proof of that, mister." The cop waits for Dexter to provide him with his last name, but Dexter refuses to comply. The cop sighs and informs a worried-looking Sammy that Dexter will stay here for the whole day. "He hit him in front of us. We cannot ignore that." "Oh, you ignore so many things." The cop purses his lips and walks to the desk. "It's better if you leave now, ma'am. We are still conducting an investigation about Mr. Englund's hospital visit and its connection with your grandson's—" "Oh, you people are useless," Sammy harshly exclaims. "Sammy," Dexter replies, having returned to his senses. "He's right. You should leave. Come back tomorrow. They will let me go tomorrow." "That depends if Mr. Englund wants anything to do with you." Sammy sighs. "You shouldn't have done that." That's one of the few things that happen. The next is, obviously, Peter's realization that Dexter did that for him. And that is such a happy realization that when Dexter backs away into a corner, a slow smile creeps up his handsome visage. Why is he smiling? He had absolutely no idea, but because the timing seemed right, he is. Instead of leaving, Sammy asks the police officer if she can bail out Dexter. And after an hour of argument thrown back and forth, the cop tells her that although he doesn't care a lick if Englund has gotten hurt, he cannot let Dexter out just like that because if Englund later decides to do something about Dexter, he will get in trouble. But Englund, who's been watching the entire ordeal with a broken nose, promises that he isn't going to do anything. "I want to get this over with," he tells the officer. "You can let that douchebag out." Sammy turns to him. "Englund, if there's any douchebag here, it's you. Officer, if you'll please let Dexter out, he and I will leave immediately." And then discreetly, the same thing is done. Dexter comes out of the jail in less than 2 hours. An hour later. "You mustn't do that again, Dexter," Sammy advises Dexter on their way out. "Englund is a powerful man in this town. It's not wise to get in trouble with him." Dexter cracks his knuckles. Except for the scratch on his little finger, he looks and seems unfazed by the entire ordeal of the last few hours, except for that one little information. If Englund wants to harm me, he will manage to do that. What I am really worried about is how we are going to prove he's the bad guy. Sammy seems just as lost as him and replies with a small reassuring, "Let me handle that, Dexter." Because Sammy wanted to see Peter alone today, Dexter finds himself walking straight towards his flower shop. One of his workers, Megan, looks surprised at the sight of him. "I didn't think you'd be here today." "I hope you haven't invited your girlfriend over, Megan. I'm in no mood to entertain any of that." "No, of course not," Megan replies in the same breath as she types out a hurried message to her girlfriend. "I will check out the flowers in the back." Dexter nods at her and stands in front of the sunflowers. For the longest 5 minutes of his life in recent times, Peter experiences pure bliss. And all of it comes from the sight of sunflowers, his favorite flower that Dexter took notice of rather quickly. To imagine him farming sunflowers in the cold of the winter is a humbling thought and a romantic one, and to imagine there was a time when he berated himself for assuming Dexter's sexuality at the lowest point in his life. "If not for the greenhouse, the sunflowers were fucked," Megan comments from behind Dexter. "Language, Megan," Dexter replies. Megan snorts at that. "What are you, Captain America?" When Dexter doesn't reply, she clears her throat and continues. "So, how's your Peter?" Dexter scoffs. "He's not my Peter." "Oh sure," she teases. "Be productive, Megan, before I fire you." "Got it, I'll find some work." She shows him a thumbs up and rushes out of there. "Also, hey," she calls after him. "Dylan came asking for you." He shows her a thumbs up. "I'll meet him later," he tells her, and then mutters to himself, "He's probably going to ask about Peter." The next day. There are a few things that Dexter does outside of visiting the hospital and spending hours and hours on the round at his flower shop. It's visiting another place, just outside of the town, or nearly at the edge of the town. In nearly a dreamy sequence, he walks straight into the smooth grass, and at the edge of the hills that overlook into nothingness, well, at least at this time of the day, it's nearly past midnight, and he is pondering over the offer Sammy gave him just early in the morning. At 7 in the morning, Sammy called him and asked him if he wanted to come and see Peter. She was going there, but having recently learned what happened with Peter and adjusting the timeline with the kiss Peter shared with him, he could not help but be filled with guilt up to the brim. And it was for the same guilt that he decided not to see Peter and made a flimsy excuse. By the tone Sammy used next, Dexter knew she knew what was going on, but she was kind enough to drop it at the time. Later in the day, Sammy texted him that Peter's actually doing well. "The doctor said we should give him a week or so and he will come back well. He's showing good signs finally, Dexter," she texted. And now Dexter's here, sitting on the cliff that could possibly lead to his death, wondering how he's going to face Peter once he finally wakes up for good. There was a time when Peter had said he considered Dexter a really good friend and promised that he was sharing things that he hadn't shared with anyone else. So there were a lot of emotions at play here. So as he pondered over those memories and his own guilt of not having understood Peter's plight, Peter's consciousness observed his consciousness in silence. The transition isn't all bad after all, because Peter has the first row seat to carefully analyze the feelings of Dexter, and there's little chance that all of this is not affecting Peter the way it should affect him. Trust me when I say this, Peter is enjoying all of this a little too much. The next day, as if through some miracle, Dexter wakes up with the feeling that he can go and visit Peter. So, he walks up and down the room and waits for Sammy to call him or message him to ask him the same old question. The moment she does, he decides he will answer her that he will be there at the hospital. He needs to see Peter. There was a time when he must have felt all alone, dealing with all the things that he was dealing with. But the same must not continue, and Dexter's going to make sure about that. Then hours pass, and then some more, and Sammy neither calls nor messages, and Dexter grows worried. He knows Englund's out of the bars already, and with the police having no proof against him, he is almost a free man right now. Not entirely free, however, because he's still under suspicion and police can put him under arrest at any time. But he is free. Naturally, Dexter grows worried about Sammy and decides to call her on his own. He calls her number and when she picks up, asks if she's alright. Sammy's almost like his own grandmother, so he might as well treat her as one. "Will you come today?" she asks eventually, and Dexter confirms that he will be there. A few hours later, when Dexter finally reaches the hospital, he finds something that he knows he wasn't expecting. Sammy hurt and admitted in the hospital. He gingerly reaches for her hand as she sleeps and asks her what happened when she wakes up some 15 minutes later. In those 15 minutes, all he assumed was that it must have been Englund's fault in some way. He looked upset at Sammy when they met at the station, and who knew what else that man had in his mind. And I admit it's not entirely Dexter's conscience that he runs a hand through Sammy's gray hair and pats her head gently. It is Peter, and he is as worried as he can be, considering he's seeing her in a position that he knows he wouldn't ever want her to be in, not after he got in trouble himself. But then Sammy shakes her head at Dexter and promises that it isn't Englund's doing. "I did this to myself." This time, instead of the usual worry that laced Dexter's consciousness just a few minutes earlier, it disappears and transforms into confusion and fear. Is Sammy doing alright? And this isn't only Dexter's fault, but even then Dexter realizes that he has never really asked Sammy how she's been doing after Peter tried to kill himself. After all, they have always been close and he's the youngest of the family. "Why would you do that to yourself, Sammy?" Dexter asks. "Why do people harm themselves?" she replies, and then cackles when Dexter looks both terrified and horrified. "Oh dear, I am just joking. It is just that I am worried for Peter. I know Englund is a bad man, and knowing that he is my son, that isn't an easy conclusion to come to. It hurts me right here." She stops and points at her heart. "My grandson is fighting for his life, and his uncle, my son, is doing his best to ensure he fails at that. How do you think that makes me feel?" she asks. Dexter nods at her. "I understand that, Sammy, but why harm yourself?" She waves her hand at him and gets off the bed with his help. "This way I can stay at the hospital and make sure Englund never comes to hurt Peter," she tells him. "I cannot trust these hospital people. They've let my grandson hurt once, and I know they cannot be trusted again." And although Dexter seems to understand her, kind of, he can't help but shake his head at her again. Because Peter's consciousness is sharing his body, he feels every emotion tenfold, which is a good thing. If Cupid wants to work out this romance between these two men, in lieu of a reply, Dexter again shakes his head at her. "Sammy, I understand your sentiments, but how do you suppose Peter would feel if he ever finds out about this?" Peter already knows, but these two people are horribly unaware of that. "Promise you'll not do this again, Sammy," Dexter says and holds her gently around her elbow to guide her out of the room. "I know you're Peter's grandmother, but in the last few months, you have been nothing short of a grandmother to me too, and I would hate to see you hurt, so let's not do this again, huh?" Sammy looks at him in silence, a smile on her mouth. She seems to understand and see a future that her younger partner isn't able to. All those 70 years of experience have to help her in some way. I know you don't know me too well, he continues, but maybe we can spend some time together so that we can do that. When Peter gets better, all three of us can spend some time together. Often. He needs that. He always needs that. It'll do us all good, don't you think? At this, Sammy nods with a bright smile. That sounds good, Dexter. Dexter smiles at her, and Peter's consciousness relaxes next to his. I am sure that this is another thing that will ensure things go smoothly between Peter and him when the time comes. Speaking of Peter, he is right where we left him the last time. Sure, the last time his uncle tried to kill him and nearly succeeded, but with his body recovering faster than ever, the doctors have recently announced to both Dexter and Sammy that he is sure to wake up in a week or so. It's really a matter of time, Peter's doctor said. His body is recovering in a way that it hasn't in the last few months. It's a miracle indeed. We are not sure what and how it's happening, but it is good news all the same. Sammy at that smiles at him rather brightly, if I were to say. Surely by this time she probably has an idea of what's happening. It isn't just the medicines and the doctor's hard work of months at play here, but also, how do I say this? Dexter's rather affectionate feelings for Peter that he has so far managed to hide so well from Peter. But now that Peter's aware of all that Dexter feels for him and more, it is certainly helping him heal, something that Sammy aimed for all this time. Seeing what's happening here, I wonder if she knows what's up with Dexter right now. She had indicated it the last time after all. I can only assume she's good at playing a fool. She knows and yet pretends she doesn't. Have you really never asked Peter about his boyfriends, Dexter? They're in Peter's room, and the doctor had reluctantly allowed Sammy to spend her time there. Now, in recent times, she has taken to gently prod Dexter here and there. It helps her understand him better, and in turn helps Peter understand him better, which in turn will help them understand each other better when the time comes. When I say I do not understand how love works, I mean it. This is not my first rodeo, I know that, even though I have no memory of having lived through similar situations with other people in the past. Like a puppet being led by the emotional strings of the same people it's watching, I see and take note of everything these people are feeling. And certainly things are interesting. To some level, at least, why not entirely, you will wonder? Because I already know everything. We didn't really talk about so many private things, Sammy. Sammy thoughtfully nods. So you probably don't know about James, she mutters more to herself than to Dexter. Dexter rightfully looks confused. When James broke his heart, Peter came to me. We talked on the phone, really. I was a little careless at that time. I'd seen Peter getting heartbroken over boys for a very long time, and I had been warning him about this James boy a lot, but he never listened to me. When James broke his heart, cheated on him really, I thought he would get better in some time. He always did, but then James died and everything was ruined. That man died and left the guilt of his own cheating on my grandson. Peter didn't come to talk to me about it. He went to Englund, she continues. Then he tried to kill himself later. Peter's consciousness shifts inside Dexter. This is the moment of realization. As Dexter and Sammy look at each other in half-awareness, Peter's consciousness wonders if they will finally understand what really happened. On the bed, and unknown to them, Peter's fingers twitch on the bed. What does that imply? Well, in the simplest terms, Peter's consciousness is soon going to return to his own body, and he will most likely wake up this time. Do you think Englund did something during that time? Sammy asks Dexter. Sitting opposite her, Dexter stares at her in silence, and they both come to the conclusion that yes, Englund has done something then. Both are, however, too terrified to accept that Peter shared a similar fate to that of Nina. I think you should return to your room, Sammy, Dexter tells her. Sammy wordlessly nods at him. Yes, I think the same. A couple days later, bearing witness to the absolute madness of Dexter, I can stand for Dexter and say that this kid hasn't slept in 2 days now. It is true that he had some kind of inkling a few days ago about what really transpired between Englund and Peter, but having come this close to the truth seems to rattle something in him. So, for the last 2 days, he has not slept or eaten or bathed, really, which is unhygienic, and thankfully, he seems to come to the same realization. In the evening of the third day, and having been to his flower shop only twice in the last couple of days, he stands under the spray of the shower and washes himself clean, and thinks of nothing else but Peter. 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 He accepts that he has been fascinated by Peter for a long time, probably since the day he first saw him, but because of his own fears and uncertainty, he never moved a finger to ensure that something happens between the two of them. And then, the kiss. Yes, the kiss. How can he forget the kiss? Until that point, he had only expressed his love for Peter through the sunflowers he often left for Peter, a move he started the day he came to terms with his mother's death, something that seemed possible only because of Peter. The kiss itself was so sudden, and Dexter's feelings for Peter so overwhelming that he could think of nothing but running away. And now, he's here, alone. Loneliness is a feeling that Peter relates to on extraordinary levels, so when Dexter fills himself up with feelings of self-loathing, Peter tries to push him to think of other things, good memories between them, of the moments where Dexter made him laugh or when Peter made him laugh. Those were good moments, and just like that, a feeling of content takes over Dexter's frame to some extent. And Peter, well, let's just say he falls in love a little more than before. When the clock hits 11 in the night and he finally slips in the bed and almost falls asleep by the time it hits 2 in the morning, a loud ringtone breaks the harmony of silence around him. He gets up quickly, has a headache in place, and looks for his phone. It's from Sammy. "Hello, Sammy?" he asks, his voice hoarse. "Dexter, I am so sorry, son." "What happened? Are you all right?" "Englund came to the hospital," she tells him. "He tried to hurt Peter again." Dexter rushes out of his home. Englund had come to the hospital to see Peter. No, to hurt him, really. This time, for whatever reason, he had been drunk and stalked into Peter's room with a knife. Because he was unsteady, he hurt himself a lot by the time he reached Peter's room. Then he ran into a long tirade about how Peter ruined his life or did this or that, things that were loud enough to attract attention from the hospital staff. When the staff finally rushed into Peter's room, he loudly roared at them and, according to Sammy, that "I'm going to kill you so that he never speaks of what I've done to him." And then the police rushed in, and he couldn't get to Peter, and jumped to his death from the 5th floor of the hospital building. Some half an hour after the commotion, Sammy said Peter woke up. Englund had taken drugs, the police found out. They were likely to find more after the post-mortem, but really, no one cares for him. Now that Peter's awake, the attention is somewhere else. Sammy and the staff came to the conclusion that they wouldn't tell Peter about it. I have absolutely no idea how they figured this would help the boy, but whatever they do, at least Peter's awake, even though he looks confused. Dexter isn't allowed to meet him until visiting hours the next day, so he waits in the waiting area the entire night, and Sammy does her part by coming to him every so often to give him updates. "So, he's dead," Dexter comments. "The police suspect he'd taken drugs by the time he came to the hospital. They said even if he hadn't jumped from the window, he would have died of overdose anyway." "He got off easily," Dexter comments with a sigh and then looks at Sammy with a panicked expression. "Oh, I am sorry, Sammy." Sammy shakes her head at him. "It's all right, really. I've wanted him dead ever since I found out about Nina. He had it coming. He really did get off easily." She wrings her hands together. "Maybe I could have helped Peter. My own son did something so horrible to my grandson and I was unaware of it all. How cruel is life?" Dexter pats her on the shoulder. "Peter will be okay." She nods at him. The next day. Peter looks different when Dexter finally sees him the next morning. He is weak, obviously, and his limbs are almost alright by now. But when Dexter walks into his room, Peter's eyes never move away from him. It's almost like he is willing to say something that Dexter has longed to hear all these months. But both of them remain silent on that matter for now. "Hi, Peter," Dexter says softly and stands on the foot of the bed. Sammy looks between the two of them and coughs a little. "I'll go and get myself some breakfast. God knows how hungry I am." As her voice disappears behind the closed door, Peter nods at Dexter to take the seat next to him. Dexter sits on the stool and looks shy for the longest moment. "How are you feeling, Peter?" Peter gives him a weak smile. "Is it rude to say bad?" Dexter softly laughs at that. "No, I don't think so." "Then, a little bad, but mostly embarrassed. Couldn't even get one thing right." Dexter gasps at that and reaches for his hand and holds it so very gently that it seems to surprise both of them. "Peter." Peter shakes his head at him and looks down at their joined hands. "I'm okay, really. I've seen and experienced a lot of things, and I think he stops for a while as his eyes carefully roam all over Dexter's handsome face. I think I understand so many things a lot better now. Dexter rightfully looks confused. I don't understand. Peter gives him a smile and it seems both bashful and amused. I think it's better that way because I don't know how to explain anything that happened. And then it's silent between the two, both having no idea what to say. Nana told me you brought me sunflowers. I mean, they're your favorites. It's winter, Peter exclaims. Anything for you, really. When Dexter admits that, his voice is but a whisper, but Peter hears him anyway. Did you meet the doctor? What did they say? You're trying to change the subject, Peter tells him. Dexter guiltily smiles at him. I tried to change the subject. Did it work? Peter shakes his head at him. Expected that much. Can I kiss you, Dexter? I will ask you this time. Last time, Peter, I almost lost you and didn't even get to say anything. He begins and shakes his head when Peter begins to say something. Trust me, I really don't mind. Kiss me if you want to, Dexter adds, and leans up on the bed so that Peter doesn't have to move much. He tries not to show too many teeth, but his face is so red it might as well resemble a tomato right now. Will they shift you out of this room? Peter places a weak hand on his cheek. Yeah. And then he slightly leans his head up to kiss him. A few days later, Peter knows about the fate of his uncle, and his father, now aware of what his brother did to his son, stands at the doorway to the new room Peter has been shifted into just half an hour ago, but doesn't bother coming in. Peter tells himself that he likes it that way and doesn't spare him a glance. After that rejection, Arnold quietly walks out of there. Sammy is sleeping in her room, and it is mostly Dexter who now stays with Peter. Having shared several kisses over the past few days has helped them come close, even though Dexter still doesn't know how much Peter knows. I've got a few friends who want to see you, Dexter tells Peter. Oh? Where are they? Dexter looks at him in surprise. You really want to meet them? Peter laughs. Why not? I mean, I will not talk much, but it wouldn't hurt anyone if they do come to see me, would it? I suppose not, Dexter whispers, and pins Peter's long fingers behind his ears. You know a few of them. Susie, Luke, Nina, you know them. Dylan's my friend. They're here in the waiting area. If you want to meet them, I'll call them. Yeah, Peter mysteriously smiles at him. I know them very well. Dexter chuckles at that, still as confused as ever. Sure? Do you want to ask them to return without meeting me? At the balanced expression on Dexter's face, Peter gives a laugh, the loudest in months. I'm kidding, bring them in, I'll entertain them as long as I can. Dexter smiles at him and leans up to kiss him. Thanks, baby. While the new couple seem to enjoy each other and Peter actually feels some type of gratitude for the first time in his life seeing his new friends around him, in the other part of the hospital and in Peter's old room, cleaning is going on. There is a nurse, a few staff members, and Peter's doctor present in the room. But when the sachet that Sammy has clearly forgotten to pick up falls under the hospital bed, it is the doctor who finds it. As the staff members clean the room and the nurse makes sure no documents and necessary items are left behind, the doctor grabs the sachet in his hand and turns it over. He doesn't understand what it is. He puts it in his pants and gives orders to the present staff before walking out of the room, unaware of the power the sachet holds. What do you think will happen next now that the sachet is no longer with Peter? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.